I'm Senator Bob Huff. Thank you for joining me for my Capitol comment for the week of January 21st, 2013. Governor Jerry Brown always gives a good speech, and his State of the State speech was no different. Now, interestingly, this time he read it. He didn't do it off the cuff like he normally does, so it was a little bit stiffer, but the content obviously didn't get changed. Now, people have been wondering how Republicans can be relevant with our few numbers here in Sacramento, but I've always said there's no monopoly on good ideas. In fact, today's State of the State was filled with Republican ideas. First and foremost was fiscal discipline. The governor talked about saving for a rainy day, invoking a vision from the Bible, from the Pharaoh and the 7 cows and the lean years and the fat years. He said it's cruel to start programs only to cut back later that you can't sustain. He talked about stopping the boom and bust cycle that we have, which serves no one, and emphatically said we are not going back there. He talked about reforming the categorical spending in education, where Sacramento figures out how it's to be spent rather than at the local level. He talked about tuition freeze in higher education, and we Republicans have already introduced that bill this year. He also talked about CEQA reform. That's the Environmental Quality Act that Governor Ronald Reagan signed and we would like to see happen, but it's become a blunt instrument to kill job projects. And he talked about reforming education. He talked about less legislation. In fact, he had a very interesting quote. He said, "The most desirable laws are those that are the rarest, simplest, and the most general. And I even think that it would be better to have none at all than to have them in such numbers as we have." Well, that sounds very Republican to me. So the governor's excellent on rhetoric, but does his reality match it? He talked about not having a boom and bust, and yet he just raised taxes on the rich and made our budget that much more volatile. He talked about saving for a rainy day, and yet he's growing state general funding by 25% in 3 years. In addition, he's advocating for the high-speed rail with no adequate model for paying for it. This is unsustainable. He calls for less legislation, but will he veto it? Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger vetoed much more. He advocates for more responsibility at the local level and yet keeps in place a top-down approach to teacher hiring and firing, which cripples local government, the local electeds at the school level, from making the best decisions for them. For the 2/3 of the state's population that gets its water through the Delta, then there is good news from the governor because he again reaffirmed his commitment to the Delta Tunnel, which is a more reliable way to get water through that sensitive area. Again, does Brown's rhetoric match his reality? It hasn't in the past, it probably doesn't this time, but that's where we all have to hold him accountable. He said good things today, and we want to build on that.